Could it be? With me, your man, Louie Tee, here on behalf of Bleacher Report, talking about the Washington Commanders and some wild offseason trade ideas. So this has been a fantastic offseason thus far for the Washington Commanders. I can't imagine it going any better than it's gone to this point. Maybe we could have grabbed a tackle or two. Maybe that would have been the cherry on top. But considering everything that Washington had going against them going into this offseason, they were in a pretty advantageous position. Let me first say that, with 6 picks in the top 100 after trading Montez Sweat and Chase Young, having all of the cap space, the second most cap space going into the offseason of any team in the NFL. They had a lot of things working in their favor, but the roster was not ideal. And there was a lot of work to be done. They had to move on from a lot of players. They did not have a franchise quarterback, which is what they were looking to get in the draft. And we hope that's what they've landed on in Jaden Daniels. And so there were a number of things working against them as well. But with that said, you can't fix everything in one offseason. I've been adamant about that. It is May. And we're at that point of the offseason where why not, right? I mean, what else are we going to do? It's May, right? So let's throw out some cockamamie trade ideas, shall we? So let's start with some things that are a little bit more rational. There's a rumor right now circulating that Washington could be potentially interested in moving one of 2 players. Now, I personally don't see them doing anything with the defensive tackle position, especially with Johnny Newton's injury. Had he come to OTAs, been fully healthy, showed them all of the athleticism that they were looking for when they drafted him, and really felt good about what he could potentially be, maybe, just maybe, they would have entertained the thought of maybe moving a guy like Jonathan Allen. Because it was funny. I was taking a look at Washington's cap situation, and there are 3 players making over $20 million. Those 3 players are Terry McLaurin, Daron Payne, and Jonathan Allen. After that, they don't have another player in double figures in terms of annual salary per year. And so they're in a great cap space. But if you look at, those 3 players, one's a receiver, 2 are defensive tackles. Terry McLaurin's 29, Jonathan Allen's 29, and Daron Payne's 27. So if you're thinking about the timeline of when this team is going to actually be competing for something meaningful, you could argue that Jonathan Allen, of the 3, probably isn't going to be necessarily where the team needs him to be when the team is ready to compete for something meaningful. Now, that said, I've been adamant about 5 players or so that I would love to be around when this thing turns around. They went through the darkest of periods with this organization, and I'd like to see them be able to be there when this thing turns around and actually say, you know what? It was all worth it. Terry McLaurin, Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Jeremy Reeves, and Tress Way are the 5 guys in particular that they've been through pretty much a lot. Payne got here in 18, Allen got here in 17, McLaurin got here in 19. I think Way might have gotten here in like 15, and Jeremy Reeves, I think, got here in 18, 19, somewhere in there. So anyway, Allen is a guy that is going to continue to come up because after next season, 2025, he's officially a free agent. And this season, this 2024 season, is the last year in which there's guaranteed money. Next year, you're really not on the hook for anything if you were to part ways with, say, Jonathan Allen. So it's interesting. Same thing could be said with Terry McLaurin. Next year, 2025 is the final year of his deal. And so you could start asking yourself, hey, is this something that I would like to do? Maybe move on from a guy. There's a rumor that's circulating right now that the Miami Dolphins are interested in both Jonathan Allen and Dyami Brown. Now, I don't know how much validity there is to any of those rumors. I do know that Christian Wilkins is no longer in Miami. He was an integral part of what they were doing. They could not afford to keep him. He went on and got a massive deal from the Vegas Raiders. The reason why it sounds like it could have some sort of, validity to it is because they need some defensive tackle help, right? And Jonathan Allen could be a guy that could seamlessly transition right into a team that is trying to compete for a Super Bowl in the Miami Dolphins. So, that's come up. Dyami Brown, I don't see the value for a Miami Dolphins team that just, if I'm not mistaken, they just signed Odell Beckham Jr., right or wrong, right? They don't need Dyami Brown. But I could understand that after having OTAs, seeing Luke McCaffrey up close and personal, feeling good about him, adding him to the mix of Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, I could see them looking at Dyami Brown, who's in the last year of his rookie deal, and looking at a team and saying, hey, just give me a 7th-round pick for him. This guy's, he might not make my roster. Just give me a 7th-round pick and we'll call it even. I could see Washington doing that. Those are realistic, ideas. With Jonathan Allen in particular, this is what I could see transpiring, okay? Let's say that Jonathan Allen is having an excellent season. Let's say he's at the trade deadline already at 5.5 sacks in the season, and he's playing extremely well in Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr.'s defense. Washington, at that point of the season, is playing the kind of football that you expect from a young team with the highest turnover rate in the NFL, with a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback, and a coach in his first season with this particular organization. You could see Washington struggling at that point of the season. At that point, and also this is the other part of that equation, Johnny Newton has to then be healthy, and he needs to be playing well to make them feel good about moving on from a Jonathan Allen, right? At that point, I could see Washington entertaining ideas of potentially moving a guy like Jonathan Allen. Having Johnny Newton show up, play well, and understanding that you've only got one more year of Jonathan Allen after 2024, and he'll be 30 in the offseason. I could see them saying, you know what, let's move him in. A team like the Dolphins or some other team out there competing for something could see value in trading for Jonathan Allen at the trade deadline. I could see that happening. But we're talking about offseason trade ideas. And I got a few for you. Let's start with the most obvious trade in the room. Brandon Aiyuk, okay, wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers, has not struck a deal with the 49ers. We know he's disgruntled, wants a brand new contract. The 49ers are not in a position right now to pay him what he is looking for. And so all you have to do is connect the dots to make this one rational, right? Brandon Aiyuk plays for the San Francisco 49ers. Washington's general manager, Adam Peters, came from San Francisco. He was a part of the brain trust that decided that Brandon Aiyuk was worth trading back up into the first round, 25th overall, to select. And he's now gotten to the point of his career where he's kind of proven that that was a prudent trade, and he's yielded them massive dividends on them coming up back into the first round to select him. It's easy to see that Washington could use another receiver, especially not knowing what Jahan Dotson is right now and what he's going to ultimately be in this league. Knowing that Terry McLaurin is 29, going to be 30. I think Terry's 29 looks a little bit different than, say, a player that came into the league at 22 years old, 23. Terry was an older player when he came into the NFL. So his 29 isn't the same as a guy that came in after playing, 3 years of college ball and, jumping into the league. And so I think Terry's 29 isn't as bad as it sounds, as it looks. But you could use a Brandon Aiyuk, right? What would it take to get a Brandon Aiyuk if you're Washington? The 49ers aren't going to give him away. Now, from one end of the deal, you're Washington, you're saying, hey, we're not only going to have to give up draft capital. Maybe there's a player in here that entices you, which would then lessen the amount of draft capital we'd have to give up. But we also have to pay this player. Keep that in mind as well. When you're talking about a deal, if you have to pay a player, there's also that aspect too. Team's not going to give him away, though. And if you're the 49ers and they really want to keep Brandon Aiyuk, you're going to probably have to entice them with something meaty to get them to come up off of Brandon Aiyuk. It's going to have to be something along the lines of a second-round pick, maybe even a first-round pick. And if you're Washington, are you really interested in giving up a first-rounder? I know a lot of people that would jump at the opportunity to get Brandon Aiyuk, add him to this roster. Remember, also keep in mind that Brandon Aiyuk and Jaden Daniels played at Arizona State together and are the best of friends, okay? They still keep in contact. They talk all the time. They're very good friends. It makes a ton of sense when you start trying to connect the dots as to why Washington would make a move like trading for a wide receiver, Brandon Aiyuk. Makes a lot of sense. A lot of San Francisco 49er connections. You got the Jaden Daniels angle. There's a lot of reasons why it makes sense for Washington. The only thing you'd have to ask yourself is you're already playing Terry McLaurin over $20 million a year. Do you want to have two wide receivers that you're paying that kind of money to? Now, keep in mind, Terry, it comes off the books in 2025. So you're not going to be paying him for that much longer. So it's not like you're going to have, by the time you got to pay Jaden Daniels, if he turns out to be the guy you need him to be, Terry McLaurin's deal will be off the books and you'll only be paying one wide receiver big time money. Again, assuming that they're not going to pay Jahan Dotson big money. We don't know. But Brandon Aiyuk added to this roster with the likes of a Terry McLaurin, and maybe you got to give up, say, a Jahan Dotson. Maybe you have to give up a receiver, or maybe you have to, throw in a De'Ami Brown, and then you still got to give up a second-round pick, which I think most Commanders fans would be more than willing to do, right? De'Ami Brown, a second-round pick for, Brandon Aiyuk. I think most Commanders fans would jump at that opportunity. The 49ers aren't going to do that. You probably have to give up a first-round pick. And you still might have to throw in De'Ami Brown. I think there are a lot of Commanders fans that would still, jump at that opportunity. Adding a guy like Aiyuk coming off of a career year at his age with this group, I think a lot of fans would be intrigued by the prospects of doing that. That's one of the positions that Washington needs a ton of help at. If you go on the other side of the football, there's another position that Washington could use some help at. That's the cornerback position. I got a couple of trades on the cornerback side of things that are really intriguing. So follow me here. First one. Now, this one's a little iffy because I don't know if the timeline necessarily fits. Again, understand where Washington is as an organization and what they're looking to do. I think right now you want young players, guys that aren't in their prime right now, but will be in, say, maybe a year or two from now. And then you move forward there because that's when Washington will really, truly be ready to contend and compete for something meaningful. Right now, you're just trying to get your team in a position where you start to get the players that fit what it is you want to do and start getting the players to buy into what it is you're trying to accomplish and achieve. That said, I look at a guy like Marshawn Lattimore in New Orleans. I think he is available. The Saints, I don't think, want to necessarily move him, but they're listening. If the phone rings and someone comes with an enticing offer, they're listening, right? The Saints are always in cap purgatory. They could use some relief. He's a good football player, but what are the Saints actually going to win? Okay, what are the New Orleans Saints actually going to compete for? They play in arguably the worst division in football. They couldn't even win it last season. The Falcons have gotten immensely better. The Panthers are going to be better this year, you would think, with better coaching, and they've upgraded the roster significantly, right? The Buccaneers now have confidence. I don't know if Baker Mayfield's going to play well 2 years in a row. He hasn't done it to this point of his career, but they're playing with confidence right now. Who's looking at the New Orleans Saints and expecting them to do anything this season? If you're the Saints and you got an opportunity to move on from a guy who hasn't necessarily been a beacon of health, here of late, and he's costing you roughly, $17, $18 million a year, why not move on from Marshon Lattimore if you can, right? Still a really good corner when he's healthy. And you look at the Commanders, they don't have a true number one corner right now. Who's the Washington Commanders' number one corner? Emmanuel Forbes Jr.? You're right. Michael Davis? Benjamin St. Juice? I mean, these are all the names of guys that are going to be competing to start at the boundary corner positions for the Commanders. None of those guys instills tremendous confidence in their ability to cover the other team's number one wide receiver. And if you look around the NFC East, there are a lot of top-tier wide receivers. And now that the Giants have added Malik Neighbors, it doesn't get any easier in that division. So you need a dog at corner. Marshon Lattimore slides in and immediately gives you credibility at the cornerback position. So, again, that's a guy getting up there in age, right? He's in that 28, 29 range. So may not make sense from an age perspective. I'd be interested, though. Now, what is going to be interesting is, what is it going to take to get the deal done? Could you do a straight-up swap, Jonathan Allen for Marshon Lattimore? Would the Saints be interested in that? Maybe, maybe not, right? And technically speaking, if you're the Saints and you took on Jonathan Allen's entire contract, you'd be taking on more money than you're actually slated to pay Marshon Lattimore, which the Saints aren't looking to take on more salary, right? So either Washington would have to eat a portion of that to make it palatable for the Saints, or you'd have to go in a different direction and actually just go strictly draft capital, right? Maybe throw in another player of lesser financial burden for the Saints, and then maybe a pick or two, right? I think about the L'Jarius Sneed trade and what it took to get him from Kansas City. Now, a little bit of different circumstances. That's more of the Brandon Aiyuk situation, where a team kind of has a player stuck in limbo that they know they have to move on from, similar to maybe more like T. Higgins, right? Where you know this guy isn't going to be back more likely than not, kind of stuck in limbo. You want to move him, and so you take what you can get. The Chiefs got a 3rd round pick and a swap of 7th rounders in 2025 or something to that effect. I don't think that's going to get it done for a player of the caliber of a Marshon Lattimore. But I think a 2nd round pick can get you a Marshon Lattimore. I think, personally, maybe a 2nd in the upcoming draft, and maybe a 4th or 5th the following year. If you're interested, you could try to, stagger them and give you up 1 this year and 1 the following year, if the Saints are interested in doing that. If the Saints are like, no, we want all of our stuff now, you might have to give up a 2nd now and possibly a 4th, and then maybe you get a 5th back in return from New Orleans, right? Something along those lines, right? He's that caliber of corner. And if you look at how much he's being paid right now, what the going rate is for corners, and seeing the money, he's on a deal right now. It's a steal for Marshon Lattimore, because he signed his deal, when he did. You look at what L'Jarius Sneed signed for, what was it, 4 years, $76 million, I believe, right? So that's kind of, and that's still in the neighborhood of where Marshon Lattimore is. But for his for the type of player he is, makes a ton of sense to me, right? So I think the one that would entice me the most, though, is this trade right here. I'm calling up the Denver Broncos, and his name has been thrown around in trade talks. I don't think the Broncos are actually interested. I wouldn't be if I were them, because you could argue pound for pound, he's the best player that the Denver Broncos have on their roster, and he's the one beacon of light that they've had on that football team defensively, that is, after all of the moves that they've made. But it wouldn't stop me from picking up the phone and calling and seeing if they were interested in moving Patrick Surtain II. If I'm Washington and there's a chance that I could get one of the best young corners in the NFL who's still on a rookie deal, right? You trade for him, you pick up his fifth-year option, you'd see if he plays well in Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn's scheme, and if he does, you pay the kid big money. You're in a position where you can do that. If you're Washington, he immediately bolsters your secondary, and I'd be willing to give up a first-round pick for him. If you're the Washington Commanders, getting a guy like Patrick Surtain at this point of his career where he's about to ascend into the prime of his career, he's right where you need him to be, at the age that you need him to be, at the point of his career where you need him to be. When you start getting to the point where you're ready to win, he'll be ready to play his best football from that point forward for the next 4 to 5 years. He's the exact kind of player you're looking for. He fits what Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn want to do. He can play both man and zone coverage. He can take the football away. He's exactly the kind of corner they could use in Washington to really hammer their scheme home, right? He's young. He's talented. You don't find players in the draft like him every day. And again, there are going to be some really good corners coming out in next year's draft, right? There are going to be some really, the Michigan kid is going to be outstanding. You're not going to be in a position to draft him, however, more likely than not. Okay, right? So it's rare that you get a guy that was a top 10 pick and you have the ability to trade for him. And where Denver is, right? I don't know how they see themselves. They drafted Bo Nix. I don't know where they kind of see themselves in arguably one of the toughest divisions in football, with the 2-time Super Bowl defending champion Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers, and a Raiders team that almost made the playoffs last year. Still don't have a quarterback, so I don't know, if you respect what the Raiders are doing right now or not. But you could argue the Broncos are the worst team in that division right now. So if that is in fact the case, are you really going to win anything right now? Are you even in a position, after paying the money that you paid to Russell Wilson and are still paying to Russell Wilson, are you even in a great position to be paying a guy like Patrick Surtain the kind of money that he's going to demand, here in the next year or so? I mean, obviously you can pick up his 5th-year option, let him play it out, but then you put yourself in a tough spot, because then he's got you handcuffed at that point. Now you've got to play his game, because either you're going to sign him long-term or you're going to have to franchise tag him. Then you're going to be paying him big money for 1 year of service, and the Broncos are not in a position to do that. So if you're Denver, would you entertain the idea of moving on from Patrick Surtain II? His name has come up in trade talks numerous times over the last 2 seasons in particular. They've kind of rebuffed any advances about Patrick Surtain. I don't blame them. He's really good. If you're the Commanders, he makes a ton of sense at a massive position of need. And I myself, after acquiring the quarterback, if he is what we think he is, and the prevailing thought is, if you're Washington, you're probably going to need a left tackle next season. Who are we kidding? So why give away a first-round pick when you could spend that on a left tackle next season? I get that too. But if you got a chance to get a guy the ilk of a Patrick Surtain II at one of the most important positions on the football field, You could argue that cornerback is the most important position on the defensive side of the football. I think it's the chicken or the egg. Is it the edge rusher that impacts the game more, or is it the cornerback? Advanced statistics and analytics and all of the analytics buffs will tell you that it's the cornerback that impacts the game more, because you can take a corner and put him on a receiver and take that receiver and erase him from the game. With an edge rusher, you can neutralize an edge rusher. You can double team him. If you need to, you can triple team him. You can chip him. You can do things to disrupt an edge rusher. You can get the ball out of your hands quickly and neutralize that edge rusher and not allow him to really impact the game. It's hard to take a corner out of a ball game if that team is able to scheme it up and get that corner to be a star corner and move around and shadow the other team's best receiver. Whatever the case may be, corner is a dire need for Washington, and I see Patrick Surtain as a guy that, if I were Washington and the Denver Broncos said, yeah, just give me a 2025 first-round pick and we'll call it even, I'd do it in a heartbeat, pick up his fifth-year option if that hasn't already been done yet, and we forge on, right? Maybe you got to throw a guy, and again, I hate to continue to throw guys into deals, right? Like a Jonathan Allen or a Dyami Brown, specifically Jonathan Allen. I don't think most Commanders fans really care about Dyami Brown being thrown into a deal, but I mean, I'd throw a guy like Benjamin St-Juste into the deal in a heartbeat. You know, he's in a similar position to Dyami Brown, 1 year left on a rookie contract. If you're Denver, if you're going to move on from a corner, why not get another one back in return and see if this guy can play in his final year of his rookie contract? And if he ends up being solid for you, you may be able to afford him and re-sign him back in Denver. Again, I don't see the Broncos signing up for any of this. I don't see the Commanders looking to do any of this, right? But I wouldn't be opposed to the idea of adding a big-time corner. You know, a lot of Commanders fans wanted Washington to sniff around L'Jarius Sneed when he was available, and seeing what he ultimately fetched in terms of compensation and what he got paid, Washington could have done that. They absolutely could have gotten L'Jarius Sneed. But I don't think that's where they are. Like, that's not. And again, to me, you shouldn't be getting L'Jarius Sneed unless you feel like you're close to winning something. Like, he went to Tennessee. Where are the Titans going? They don't even know if they have a quarterback or not with Will Levis. You know, L'Jarius Sneed is at the point of his career now where he's, to me, he's peaking right now. Last year was his best year of his career. Next year and the year after that, he'll probably be really good again, right? And then we'll see, right? Are the Titans going to be in a position to strike and potentially be winning something of note when he's still playing his best football? We'll see. And that's the problem. We know Washington isn't competing for anything meaningful this year. Even if they surprise everyone and do what the Texans did last year, they're still not winning a Super Bowl, right? You're still not winning a Super Bowl. So he could help. He being Marshawn Lattimore or a Patrick Surtain II. But you want to try to find guys that fit your timeline, and Patrick Surtain II fits the Washington Commanders timeline. What says you? Would you trade for Patrick Surtain? Would you be willing to part ways with a 2025 first-round pick right now for Patrick Surtain II? Let's run through some of these comments before we get out of here, man. Let's see. Justin Moody says Justin Jefferson to the Commanders. Yeah, right. Do you know how much you're gonna have to pay that dude? Yeah, right. I mean, you're already paying Terry McLaurin. It's hard for me to envision a situation where you, first of all, the Vikings aren't doing that, right? I mean, it takes two to tango. They're not trading their best player. arguably one of the best players in the league, not just the best player at the receiver position. You could argue, irregardless of position, Justin Jefferson is one of the best players in the league. And it'd take a lot. I mean, you'd have to give up multiple first-round picks to get him. Right? They're not just going to give him up for a one. That's interesting, though. Kel Glizok says, definitely need a lockdown corner, and that's why I would go after a guy like Patrick Surtain II for sure. Let's see. Xavier Howard is out there. Facts. You don't have to give up anything for him either. You just have to sign him to a contract. But again, can he stay healthy, and what does he have left in the tank? Clearly, the rest of the league is waiting on their situation to see if it becomes a dire need, because nobody has signed Xavier Howard to this point. And it felt like he was starting to slow down, but he's definitely, a guy that when he's healthy and he's right, can play some ball. But he's on the downside of his career. He's 30 years old, and you think his best football is probably behind him. Let's see. So I asked the question, would you trade a first-round pick for Patrick Surtain II? And Jay Acosta 21 says definitely a first-rounder for Surtain. Nino Wilson says PS2 with Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn, fire. I know, right? I mean, one can dream, right? One can dream, right? Jared says, yeah, I agree. I think I'd give up a first for Surtain and not think twice about it. Exactly. You know what would be great too is if you get Surtain, and then, because I would think that if a team like Denver did that with us, they're hoping that we suck this year. And if we ended up winning 8 or 9 games, you're going to be in that 17, 18, possibly 19 range, depending on if you just missed out on the postseason. And then you don't feel as bad about giving up that pick. You only feel terrible about giving up a future first rounder when you suck that year. I go back to the Robert Griffin III trade back in 2012, and we just assumed that we'd be nice, right? And really, you didn't care at the time because you got your franchise guy, and we won, 10 games, won the division in 2012. So it wasn't a great pick in 2013, but that 2014 first round pick, that was brutal. It was the second overall pick in the draft. Ouch. That's what you don't want to give up, right? That's what you don't want to give up. Let's see. We got Command Her says, hell yeah, they'd give up a first round pick for Patrick Surtain. Jared says, expeditiously. Chris McWilson says, yeah, I'm on target with that one. Shout out to the mob, Kino. You know what it is. Jay Acosta says, you got me barking, LOL. Trade for that first for Surtain. Again, we're assuming that the Broncos are down for the cause, and they're probably not. They're probably not. Chris writes, we would have to trust AP to do Jedi mind tricks to get Jay Jettas. You'd have to do more than just Jedi mind tricks. I don't know how you could get them to come up off of Justin Jefferson. I mean, like I said, he's one of the best dudes in the league. Denny says, I'm trading my grandmother in a first for Patrick Surtain. Hey, does your grandmother, does she play corner? Does she rush the quarterback? Can she get after the quarterback? They might be interested. Oh man, grandma will understand. I love it. So of all of the trades, that's my favorite one. Going after PS2. If you can get that guy at this point of his career playing the kind of football that we know he's capable of playing in a system that is cornerback friendly. After watching what Deron Bland did and the year before that, Trayvon Diggs did under Joe Witt Jr. and Dan Quinn, I'd love to see what Patrick Surtain II could do in that same scheme, right? But anyway, I digress. It's May, and this is what we do best this time of the year. Talk about things that will probably never happen. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on behalf of Bleacher Report, talking about Washington Commanders wild off-season trade ideas. I hope you enjoyed this stream, and I look forward to chopping it up with you guys next time. Until then, you guys, take care. Have a good one.